All right, everybody, it is June of 2025, and we are joined again by friend of the show, C3PAO manager extraordinaire, famous Mount Rushmore CMMC individual, Fernando Machado. Give it up. Air horns in the background. Applause for everybody. You know him. You love him. You've seen him at conferences. You've seen him around the ecosystem. You've seen him on LinkedIn. If you don't know who he is, I don't know how that's possible. It's Fernando Machado, everybody.
What's going on, guys?
So a couple months ago, we had you on the podcast.
Hold on, dude. That big lead up, right? Fernando, extraordinaire. We didn't mention his great shoes, anything like that. Hey, guys. How's it going?
Here we go. It's all right. It's all right. Man, a few words, but big impact around the ecosystem. So, Fernando, we had you on the podcast a couple months ago. As of June of 2025, CMMC as a program has now been in place and effective for 6 whole months. You guys have just completed your 25th CMMC Level 2 assessment. But for the people at home who maybe aren't familiar with you, for the people who are just now waking up to what's going on with CMMC, who are you? What do you do? What have the last 6 months been like? Let everybody know at home who they're listening to.
Yeah, so I'm Fernando Machado, the managing principal and CISO at Cybersec Investments. We're an authorized CMMC third-party assessment organization. So the only thing that we do are CMMC third-party certification assessments, and we're located in Melbourne, Florida. The last 6 months have been crazy, and the demand has just gotten even more crazy. We're currently right now booking into February and March of next year, and we're starting to see that demand even grow. We have no availability left for 2025 calendar year.
Yeah, I mean, we've heard
we've
heard the backlogs are growing like crazy. I know that of the various C3PAs I've talked to, you have been backlogged and booked out for quite some time, and that's the proof is in the pudding. You guys have done 25 of these assessments, so we're excited to dive into your takeaways, what you've learned, what you've seen, how that's been going. But maybe just at the top, can you tell us maybe about the makeup of these 25 companies, like the general size, the revenue, what is their maturity like? Do they have existing internal teams for security? Are they using MSPs? Are these subcontractors, primes, new contracts, existing work? What's the ballpark look like of the companies you've been working with?
Yeah, so I actually went back and I broke down kind of like the different industries that the organizations work. And believe it or not, or it could be believable, the vast majority of, I'd say 40% of the assessments that we completed were all external service providers. Then another 30% were professional services organizations. And these are usually small businesses. So I'm using the SBA's term of small business of 500 employees or less.
Mm-hmm.
Then about 10% was about manufacturing clients. And then I think we had another 10% in engineering. And then we had another 10%, which was literally one company, right? Because we're trying to, 25 is a very hard number to break up into 100 percentile. So it was one company that we did that was a construction company of about 50 employees.
Well, it's interesting because, I mean, it's a good thing that the majority of the companies, or at least a large amount of the companies, are managed service providers because of the key role that they play in the ecosystem. But It's kind of interesting to me that so many of the actual subcontractors or the smaller organizations themselves were not at the front of the line in the first 25 here, because you're booked out like crazy. Everybody knows that it's happening. It's been in place for 6 months, and yet the largest grouping of companies that are getting the certs early, if you will, aren't actually the contractors themselves, which I think is very interesting.
I think contradictory to that, I think that it's actually surprising that so many providers were at the front of the line trying to get there.
Yeah.
I thought it was going to be more delayed there too. I do also think that it is surprising that not as many subcontractors are really beating down the gates.
Yeah. Well, maybe let's get into some specific questions about what you've seen from in individual assessments, huh?
Pick me.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, Fernando, I got to ask, because I think one of the things that we talked about in our first conversation with you, and then one of the things that we kind of coined was the term false start, a false start, not getting out of phase one. And I'm just going to ask, in the 25 or so assessments that you've completed, how many have you seen? Are they very common?
Yeah. So luckily for us, we've partnered with good consultants and service providers. So we really don't see that many, but we recently did have 2 false starts. We had one client that didn't have an incident response plan. when we asked them, hey, do you have any, they didn't have anything at all for the incident response control family. So we asked them, maybe it was an oversight, part of the document dump that they were supposed to provide us that maybe it was just missed. And we asked them, hey, what do you guys have for the incident response control family? Any documentation or artifacts that you can provide to support this? And the answer that we got back was, well, we just opened up a ticket. And I'm like, yeah. So you're not ready for an assessment. And we went ahead, we did what was called an adverse determination and just non-voluntarily rescheduled them. And then the other contractor that we had sent us their trove of documentation. And in going through it, the assessment team discovered that the POAM document had items that were listed as open. The assessment team asked about it. They then said, oh, that was the wrong document. And they took a while for them to get us back, the quote unquote correct document. That never came back. So we turned around and we non-voluntarily rescheduled them as well. So we would have had 27 CMMC assessments, but we had to push back 2 of them, which now puts us at 25.
And so, but in both cases, it was you as the C3PAO having the adverse decision to stop it.
Correct.
Right? And was there pushback for it, or it was basically accepting? It was more, oh yeah.
There was a little bit of pushback until they start to realize that it's one of 2 things. Either they get non-voluntarily rescheduled, or they go through the assessment, they fail, and we end up, billing them for it at a later time. Which I think once they sit back in hindsight, they probably think that that's probably the best way to move forward, is just to go through the assessment the first time, at least in their mind, that they have everything ready to go.
Yeah. Well, so how many conditional statuses have come out of the assessment? So this would be for anybody at home. So you make through phase 1, you go through the assessment, but you don't have everything implemented. There's some small subset of requirements that are allowed to be parked on a POAM that you have 180 days to fix. So that would result in a conditional status as long as you close out your assessment later on. Have you had very many of those?
We have not. We haven't had a single conditional level 2 certification yet. And again, that's a testament to the good consultants and service providers that have been helping them. And a lot of the contractors that we've been working with have all had service providers that have been in industry since the very beginning. So that kind of makes getting a level 2 conditional cert, like that just lessens that risk on that end.
I mean, it makes sense because all of these people would be considered early adopters. I guess the earliest of the early adopters would have been people who'd gone through joint surveillance assessments. And then the people who get their CMMC L2 assessments prior to CMMC being in contracts would be like the second wave of early adopters. And so they're going to know what's going on, right? I mean, they're going to be familiar with what's going on. They've partnered with people, what's going on. So it's no surprise that we haven't seen very many conditional statuses in your set of assessments so far. That doesn't surprise me at all.
I want to kind of backpack off of that then. So you said you haven't issued any, or there's been no conditional assessments. How many have you failed?
We haven't failed any. However, right, I think in the situation that we talked about earlier, where we had to non-voluntarily reschedule those contractors, I believe that if we would not have caught that during the pre-assessment phase of reviewing their documentation, those organizations would have failed, and those would have been 2 failures on our docket.
Yeah.
So you're saying like the foundational documentation, like you're noticing that if it's in place and they pass through phase 1, that usually it's an easier process to get through everything else.
Correct. Yep.
Nice.
Yeah. I mean, it makes sense. This is something that we called out early on, where we were like, the number of people who fail CMMC will be pretty small because the people who make it through pre-assessment review are more likely to pass than not pass. And so looking for assessment failures isn't really going to be a thing. You're just going to have a bunch of people that just don't qualify for assessments, which is, in this small subset so far seems to be what you're seeing. So, all right. So we got a bunch of these companies that have had great success then. So they no conditionals, no failures, and very few false starts. So do they have any like green flags in common amongst this set where it's like, going into your interaction with them that they're going to be fine or probably fine?
Yeah. So when we start working with some of these like trusted providers, we kind of see the same song and dance, the same type of documentation on how it's laid out, the same network architecture. So we start to become familiar with that, with their methodology, and they start also to become familiar with us on what we're going to be looking for. And 9 times out of 10, when they document their things in their system security plan down to the assessment objective, that always makes, an assessor's heart just warm. And then also supplemental documentation, right? Like another huge green flag. When you start providing me things like a shared responsibility matrix, that makes us happy. We're like, okay, you get it. So you're probably the chances of success for you have just gone up.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I want to kind of backpack on that again. And so when you get into these green flag assessments or any assessments in general, how long are they normally taking? And is it always a full week, or are there certain conditions in which it tethers back and forth? You might know that going into the situation, it's a full week, but then you see something different, you know, it's shorter.
Yeah. So usually what we do is we allocate an entire week for a client, and, 9 times out of 10, it usually, we'll just say it's a week. It's usually not more than that, but we allocate an entire week because there could be instances where that client might have, on-site visits. There might be some additional documentation that has to get provided that got missed somewhere. And so usually what we're seeing now is like the well-prepared clients are seeing reduced assessment time during their assessment week. So we're actually seeing it, instead of going the full 5 business days, we're usually seeing 2 to 3 business days.
Wow. That's awesome. There you go. Fortune favors the prepared mind, everybody. Was that Louis Pasteur? Louis Pasteur in chat? Let me know. I think that was Pasteur. Anyways, so you got a bunch of great results. You got a bunch of folks with a bunch of green flags. Everything looks great. Are there still like spots that cause snags or slowdowns or anything like that? Are there any like requirements that are more often an issue or not? Like just an amount of work, or you spend more time on? Like, are there anything like that in the overall set of stuff you gotta address?
Yeah. So the biggest thing is the cage codes, right? That's causing a lot of problems in EMAS. So sometimes what'll end up happening is a contractor will tell us, yeah, we want these list of cage codes, and they all, supposedly tie back up to the highest level owner. And what ends up happening is they don't go into sam.gov to make sure that the cage codes are all aligned to the HLO. Mm-hmm. And so when everything gets submitted, then what ends up happening is on the SPRS side, it'll show that only 3 out of the 5 cage codes actually transferred over, because the other 2 cage codes, for example, they're not tied to the HLO. So now we have to go back and do rework. We have to go back and delete the record. We have to contact EMAS. This is a big headache. So we're trying to get in front of that now. And we're trying to let contractors know, hey, make sure that all your cage codes are all tied up to your HLO. And if you're a service provider, there's no reason for you to have a cage code, but in order to go, you can't go through an assessment without one. So we always tell them, go onto sam.gov, go register your organization there, go obtain a cage code, and then come seek an assessment afterwards.
All right. Well, I guess two questions then. So for people at home who don't know, what is an HLO? And 2, if my managed service provider is promising me the world and says that they're going to get me ready for CMMC, but they don't have a cage code, is that a bad sign?
Yeah. So the HLO stands for the highest level owner cage code. So it's going to be that quote unquote parent company. And then usually you'll have subsidiaries or other sites that all flow up to the primary HLO cage code. Mm-hmm. As far as like promising you the world, I don't think any service provider should be promising anything, because like you never know, anything can happen during an assessment. Okay.
All right.
I want to ask some questions about, like, obviously now going through 25 assessments and counting. You've kind of gotten to hear some of the backstories, right? It's like what has the OSA gone through? Have you heard any feedback from OSAs, or your team's heard any feedback from OSAs that are having more difficulty, or their journey was much more tougher to meet in the implementation of the requirements than others?
So we've had a couple of organizations that decided to go give it a go at their own. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that we're discovering is they don't understand the requirements as well as some of the more established service providers do. Mm-hmm. So when we start going through that pre-assessment phase, that initial discovery phase, I'm finding problems left and right. I'm finding cloud service providers that are not FedRAMP. I'm finding cloud service providers that aren't even FedRAMP equivalent. Like they're just nothing at all. Okay. We've got service providers that even to this day, I don't know how many times me and Jacob have been saying this for a while, they still don't know that 800-171A exists. So at that point, we tell them, you're not ready for an assessment. Here's a list of some trusted service providers for you to go talk to. Go talk to them and come see us in 6 months to a year.
Yeah. Okay. And kind of to build off of that, right? from a different perspective, the perspective as you being the person that has to assess the environment, right? Or your team's assessing the environment. In your experience thus far, have you seen different types of environments, whether it be machine shops or whether it be different types of business models that pose different potential roadblocks or maybe more troublesome for you or your teams to assess?
Yeah, the manufacturing environments are always the trickiest because of all of the specialized assets.
Mm-hmm.
We see that quite a bit. And then we've also seen professional services environments. Those are fairly easy. And then, sometimes we start getting into environments that are just very, very small in nature. I think our smallest client was less than 5 employees, but they saw this as a competitive advantage. That's why they took the leap forward and went ahead and did it anyway.
Nice.
So are there, I guess just to close the loop, are there any specific requirements in 171? You talked about the cage code issues, like tripping people up, but were there any of the requirements in 171 that like take more time than others or more confusing for others that you've seen, even amongst the set of people who are well prepared?
Right. Yeah. So the biggest one, right, should be to no surprise to anybody in the DIB is the FIPS validated cryptography has been an issue that has caused a lot of pain.
Jeez Louise.
They're able to get through it, right? Thankfully, I mean, this guidance has always existed in 171 and 171A, but the new guidance on temporary deficiencies on, your firewalls in FIPS mode, something out of your control happens, i.e. you get this critical vulnerability, you patch it, it invalidates FIPS. The things you're supposed to do, you document it, you work with your vendor on the next FIPS iteration. And then, so you'll basically be in and out of FIPS mode, but you'll be able to at least explain that to the assessor and show your documentation on how you were in FIPS mode, then something out of your control happened.
Yeah. Yeah.
Fernando. So now that you've gone through this, I don't know if you ask the organizations that you assess this or not, but do you try to get an understanding as why they're so proactive in their implementations? Like what's triggered them to start early?
Yeah. So primarily 2 reasons, right? Number one, they're being instructed by their primes to provide proof that they're in line for a CMMC assessment.
That's a good reason.
And then the second reason is competitive advantage. They see the writing on the wall. They know that this is coming. And the first thing that they tell me is, we don't want to be priced out of the market. So we want to go ahead and get in front of this now to become early adopters.
But Fernando, it's not in DoD contracts yet. The phased rollout hasn't started yet. What do you mean that the primes are asked? What do you mean the primes are asking?
I know. This is what happens when you work for the prime, not DoD.
Which is
75%
or more of the DIB probably.
So let's backpack off that. If the DoD says that within the first year, everybody's going to have to get self-assessed, that doesn't mean that everybody that has a relationship with a prime is going to have to get self-assessed.
Correct. Yep. Yeah. Because you work for the prime, not the DoD. The primes work for the DoD.
Absolutely. All right. Well, so people are responding to pressure from the primes, their customers, whatever it happens to be. So have you heard from them yet about any like tangible business benefit? Is this just a method to keep them happy and assure them that you'll be ready to go? Are they expecting to gain more business? Like you talked about competitive advantage or any kind of differentiation. Does anybody mention their competition not doing it and they're trying to get ahead of their, like, how are they rationalizing this here?
Yeah, I haven't heard really much about, as far as like the contractors letting us know like that they need to do this, but they see the writing on the wall as a competitive advantage, which is one of the reasons that we're doing. Where we were seeing a lot of this like early success was during JSVAs, where we started seeing some of the small businesses going through and becoming proactive and getting that DIBCAC high assessment and showing their primes that they had the 110 DIBCAC high. And so at that point, a lot of those small businesses actually did benefit directly from that. And I think that once the 48 rule goes live and they're able to demonstrate to their primes and to anybody else that's looking to do business with those subs, they're gonna come right out of the gate with the CMMC cert.
Yeah.
Okay. So
all right, drum roll, everybody. Here we go.
This question, I think, is what's on everybody's mind, and it's a well-debated question. What's the ballpark range of an assessment cost? And like, can you tell me some of the biggest factors that drive that cost?
Yeah. So one of the things that we're seeing in industry is, ballpark range, things that I've seen out there ranges from like 20K, which I don't think is sustainable, all the way up to like 70K. The DoD themselves even estimates that the role to conduct an assessment for a small business entity is about 76K. I'm not saying that that's what most C3POs are charging, but right by DoD's estimates, that's what they believe it should cost. Now, the biggest factors that we're seeing on what's driving the cost up is, one, the DoD decided that it's 2 assessors are going to be required for every assessment. So a lead CCA and then a CCA on top of that. And then you add the 3rd assessor to conduct the QA. Also the organization, right? How complex are they? Do they have various cloud service provider environments? Are they dealing with managed service providers? Are they dealing with, on-prem, various locations? Like, these are all things that could potentially drive the cost up of an assessment.
Makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, that seems to be the thing, is like, DoD came up with their estimate, but they don't really know, right? There's no way for them to really know. And that's the range of stuff that we've heard. It tends to vary pretty dramatically. So it all just depends on context. I mean, like you said, you've worked with professional services to manufacturing to engineering to MS. Those are very different types of environments, even if you include size from there. Well, hey man, I mean, this is super insightful. Congrats on 25 assessments. CMMC's been in place for 6 months.
Yeah, nice.
We'll definitely have you back after assessment number 50 for sure, which it sounds like with the way that you're booked up, it's going to happen here pretty quickly, especially once 48 CFR goes live here later this year. We'll link to your LinkedIn. We'll link to your website. We'll link to all your stuff and make sure that people can get a hold of you. We've known you forever, man. You've been around for years and years. So if you're not following Fernando, you're wrong. He puts out great information, especially on LinkedIn. Definitely check him out. We'll link to the previous conversation that we had on the podcast a couple months ago. And we'll see you after assessment number 50, man.
Yeah. Andy's a new golfer. We'll see.
Yeah. Andy did well at the, how did the tournament go at Sequest, dude?
Oh, dude, it was so bad. Like, I tried every time I connected with the ball, like I connected, I was like, all right, I hit it. Far right or left.
I mean, that's golf, man. That is golf for sure.
You're hooked. So, one of us.
Absolutely. All righty, dude. Well, thanks for stopping by. Thanks for all the awesome insight. And we'll see you at assessment 50. And for everybody else, we'll see you next week.
See you next week.
See you then.